Hi Samantha, how was your first day at the English Language Center?
Oh, hi Stefan. Well, actually it seems that things didn't go as well as I had hoped.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Would you like to talk about it?
Yes, perhaps that might help. I started with a clear idea of the grammar and language features that I wanted to cover, but somehow I had a hard time getting the students engaged.
I see. Please remind me again, what level are the students?
They are at the intermediate level.
Could you tell me what the lesson was about?
Sure. Well, before I took over the class, the students had just completed a review of the simple present and present perfect. So, I decided it would be a good idea to continue with a review of the simple past and the past perfect.
Fair enough. May I ask how you began the lesson?
I began by asking the students what they and their families had done over the weekend.
That sounds like a good way to introduce the grammar focus you had in mind. Where did you go from there?
First, I drew a timeline here on the chalkboard. Then, I used a few of the students' responses to illustrate the relationship between present and past time. Finally, I wrote a few sentences on the board using the past perfect. To make certain that the students understood the relationship between past events, I asked them which had occurred first.
How did you feel about the students' level of accuracy in this area?
I thought that most students demonstrated a fairly clear understanding of the grammar structures related to the lesson. However, I did have to correct a few other mistakes along the way.
I see. Can you tell me about the method you used to do that?
Well, I wrote the error on the board and discussed how to fix it.
What happened next?
The students became much less responsive.
What effect do you think it may have had on the students to see their mistakes written on the board?
Well, I don't know. Perhaps it made some feel uncomfortable.
A technique that has worked for me is the recast method. Are you familiar with it?
I'm not sure I am. How does it work?
Well, when a student makes a mistake, I sometimes gently call his or her attention to it by repeating or recasting what the student said. In other words, by lengthening the time it takes to say the word or by adjusting the volume or pitch of my voice at that moment, the student is able to hear the corrected form without the need to address the error directly.
I see. This way I can correct mistakes without raising students' anxiety about speaking.
That's right. Of course, you must still be mindful about how often you do it. The important thing is to always have a clear idea whether the focus of the lesson is accuracy or fluency.
What do you mean, Stefan?
Well, you said that your lesson was basically a further review of verb tenses for intermediate level students, correct?
Yes, that's right.
In that case, you might want to allow students the freedom to develop their proficient skills of the learned language feature. The students will have a better chance of success if their affective filter is lowered. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think I see your point. Knowing my lesson's focus allows me to give students the scaffolding support or the freedom they need depending on how familiar they are with using a new language feature.
How might you know how much support or freedom is necessary to give in another area of language teaching, say vocabulary?
I suppose it would depend on the context. If I were presenting a lesson about an everyday activity such as ordering a meal at a restaurant, I could be less concerned about vocabulary and more concerned about providing support to help students develop accuracy about related grammar features. For example, in the case of ordering food, modal verbs.
Yes, Samantha, and why is that?
Because, unlike academic vocabulary which requires more explicit study and scaffolded instruction, the vocabulary associated with ordering, dining, and paying for a meal at a restaurant is more common and therefore more likely that students will acquire it through incidental exposure.
Precisely. And the ability to make a formative assessment of what students need at different moments of a learning episode or within different lessons is so important.
Yes, I see.
At the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned that students' level of engagement was low. What do you think happened?
I'm not sure. Everyone was excited while talking about what they did on the weekend. But, during the grammar presentation and cloze exercises, the students just seemed unmotivated and disengaged.
I see. Perhaps it would help to have the students using the language in a more authentic way. For example, you could construct a role play using real paper menus, the kind you might find at a takeout restaurant.
I understand the value of using authentic materials in teaching grammar and vocabulary and context, but how can I achieve the same effect in something like a review of grammar tenses?
Well, I suppose that's where you need to be creative and find a way to shift the student's attention off of learning the language and onto communicating in a way that feels more natural.
Could you give me an example?
Sure, let's see. The students are working with the simple past and past perfect, so what if you were to pair each student with a partner, being certain to match each student with someone whose first language and level was different?
Okay.
You could tell the students that a certain crime had been committed by a pair of thieves and that the perpetrator was in the classroom. Give each pair of students 15 minutes to establish an alibi to explain where they were at the time of the crime. You could then ask a student from one pair to come to the front of the class and ask the other one to wait outside while the other students ask him questions about where he and his partner were. Then, the student waiting outside returns to the class and everyone begins to cross-examine him or her.
That's brilliant. That way the students would be required to use the language features I wanted to assess. For example, we had been waiting in line at the cinema for 20 minutes before someone told us the movie was sold out.
Yes, and believe me when I say they will have a lot more fun than doing class exercises from a workbook. The key to building students' accuracy and fluency is to help them transfer their receptive knowledge about language, what they have heard and seen, to productive knowledge, what they can write and say. The more amusement and emotion you can design into an activity, the more engaged the student will be and productive the outcome.
Thanks, Stefan, for helping me work through a few ways I can improve my lessons.
My pleasure, Samantha. I still remember my first day here, and the experience I had then was not too unlike yours. Teaching English as a second language might be described as both art and science, and it takes time and patience to develop. I think you know what it takes to succeed. Good luck.